Hello all and welcome to a special little walkthrough video where I'm going to show how I created this very community render you see here. This isn't going to be so much of a tutorial but more of a walkthrough talking about the way that I approached the setup for this project, how I kept myself efficient and effective while working inside of Blender. So firstly, in terms of what this image even represents, this is in fact the most recent community render created for the 300 members of our Discord server. At least that's when I started it. It in fact was completed just after the 500th member of the server joined. In the future, I'm hoping to do more auto-generated community renders from user submissions, which might create some interesting results and also make it not take so long next time. But nonetheless, this is meant to represent all the members of the community who respond to a form with their username. And from that, we developed an array of all the characters, the poses, the items, and everything that they are doing in the scene. That is something that I created after the fact. And so the way I approached this was in a few steps by first deciding to create a library for my characters, then setting up my world, and then creating a plan for the way I'm going to place the characters in the scene, and then methodically going through the scene to actually implement that plan. At a high level, that's what we did, but let's dive into the first step of the character library. And so for this, I'm going to go ahead and open the scene. You'll notice I have a bunch of working files here, but I'm actually going to share the source files for this entire project, so you can download that from Google Drive and see for yourself. You'll notice that the names may be slightly different. You're not going to have all these working versions of the file. Of each file. That's just the way I kind of work to kind of create snapshots in time. It'll just have the final versions of each one. So just so you're aware. But the first step was to create my little character library. And so I'll open up the final result here. The idea was to just first get everyone in place. Literally just making sure that all the rigs are present and in a uniform and consistent manner. And so you'll see we have all the rigs that were included here from the form. But even this I tried to automate and go as quickly as possible with, so it didn't slow me down. And so you'll see what I end up actually doing is if I go into the script editor over here, you'll see that I actually wrote a little bit of a script for this function. I won't go into the details of it, but just kind of showing off the, actually let me see if I can even reload this. Yes, so I slightly edited it from the last use here. But essentially I basically have this looking at the empty prep skin list. Then based on all the skins in this list, it automatically places in the simple player rig or the slim player rig based on the form of the player's skin itself. It actually looks at that and then places it in a grid in a consistent manner. And so it was simple as using the skin swapper here, loading it so I have all the community skins. If I go up a level and then select the skins here, actually, it looks like I lost the reference. So let me go back into the community skins folder here. There we go. So now we would have, these are all the skins that came from the form. And so basically the script is just going one by one, adding one rig for each of these, and then creating groups for them so that they're all distinct groups. You'll notice on the right-hand side over here, my collections indeed are very consistently and simply set up. Each collection name is based on the name of the skin itself. It contains the armature, and then it contains the second and first layer of the skin, which we'll end up using later. The purpose of this is so that every time I make an edit to my working scene file, it's not saving all of this data. In fact, we're writing this data once, we're saving in a character library so that we can library link all these into the final scene later. In a very similar fashion, I also set up my world. I'll open up the final version here called the world map barebones.blend. And this is simply just the world file. It's an export from JMC to obj, I believe, of a scene that you'll actually notice I did reuse the same scene from the previous community render, except we're looking at a different part of the render now. And I have already prepped it by selecting everything and using the swap, where is it? Oh my goodness. The swap texture pack option here. and switching it to the bare bones pack, which I've also included in the export on Google Drive. I did use animate texture. If you notice that when you open up this world that everything is pink initially, just flicker your arrow keys back and forth, or you should be able to simply enough just actually re-swap the texture pack. You'll notice you may have to select JMC to obs, for instance, for it to let you do that. But if I swap texture pack, you'll notice that it should already drop you into the folder, and if it doesn't, just go into resource packs, barebone, and then even from here, make sure you tick animate textures, and then swap pack, and it should do all that for you. And in my case, I didn't really make any changes. It says 81 materials affected, but I'd already applied the texture pack, so nothing new has happened here. And so this then becomes our world file. And you'll notice when I look at my Blender file down here, the bare bones map, it itself is 40 megabytes in data. And conversely, the character library itself is 79 or 69 megabytes of data. And so between that, we'd already have 100 megabytes of data that is just going to be stored to our file. Every time you press save, that slows Blender down. And if you're not editing these things, it's kind of cumbersome to, especially the way I work where I create little snapshots here and there. Instead of each snapshot of my community scene being only a few megabytes, as you can see here, they'd each be at least 100 or more. And so this is a way I can kind of modularize the way I work, make snapshots, and also just separate the different pieces so that if I need to edit something, or I don't want to accidentally edit something such as the rig or the world, I'm kind of saving myself by isolating these into different scenes. And so the way I work from there is if I actually open a new file just to demonstrate this, I would then go into, let's say, File, and then Import. Actually, sorry, I'm going to go into Link. And then I would select from my working folder here, I go into the master version of this blend file. You'll notice that I have version 1, 2, and 3, but I make a point so that the latest version I save is always overwritten to this standard named 1. And then I'd press, double click into here, and then I'd go into collection, and then I have village map is the name of my scene. Great, and so this is now a static object, which I can't really do much with. I couldn't edit it. I can't do anything else around it. But if I do ever want to edit it, there is an add-on that's perfect for this called Edit Linked Library. If you haven't used this before, it's very helpful. If I can get my preferences screen onto the right window. There we go, just put that over here. All right, that's a bit of a weird layout. Anyways, if I go into here and do Edit Linked Library, you'll see I have it enabled down here. Not on by default, I feel like it should be, but it's very helpful. Anyways, close that down. And so this allows me to jump directly into the master files editing if I so desired. And then very similarly, I then import all my individual links using the character rig. So from link, and then going up into my master character library here, I have all my collections. And then I believe I actually used a script for this step as well, just to bring everything in and make it very consistent. Like normally what I'd have to do is one by one, add the character rig, and then under, I don't even remember how I often do it. If I use the search command using F3, if I do override, I can then make this a library override. You'll see it kind of jump somewhere else on the screen, basically where it was in the original scene. I will hide my world for the meantime. And then you can see it's now over here. And now that I've created as a library override, you'll see in the outliner it has this little icon. I can then go into armature mode, and then in armature mode, I can then pose it and do everything else I want. And so it's acting as an override. But I believe I actually wrote a script that automates even some of that step. And so if I go into here, look into my subfolder, let's see if I actually, it's not there. It may actually be in one of my working files here. So let's open this up. I think I did something where I imported each rig and then I automatically made it so that the outside, like the skin, everything other than the armature was marked as to not be selectable so that I don't accidentally select things as I was working. Let me see, is it in here? No, I guess I don't have the script, but it was like, say, like a 10-line Python script. So it just shows that Python script can really save you a lot of time if you know what you're doing and just have the basics down. But basically allowed me to very easily click around on the scene and not accidentally select anything other than the armature. So I could very easily, place everything in the scene and then move it to where I wanted. But the next stage of the project was really, how do I get to this final image Never mind the pink. If I, again, move my cursor around, it'll reset the animated objects. But how do I get to this final image? How do I actually know where to place all the characters? Do I just go one by one? And I actually tried to do a little bit of planning up front. And so in this final scene, you'll find that it is fairly well organized if I collapse all the groups. Mostly if I disable everything down here and then re-enable the grease draw over collection. If I enable that, you'll see my original plan. And expanding this here, this actually is me doing a draw over of the world. And so if I actually go ahead and re-enable the map just so we can see the background, you'll see the way I kind of used a tablet and a pencil to draw different characters in different places. In some cases, I thought of little vignettes like, okay, over here we have, this lava scene. Maybe there's a mix of nether creatures coming out. Maybe someone's fishing. Maybe other people are fighting the creatures that are coming out. And so that led me to thinking of ideas of like archers in these different areas, pointing towards this. And then over here is like we have a large open space. It'd be funny if we had someone, on a boat. Like, I'm kind of thinking of a Where's Waldo-esque sort of image. There's lots of crazy stuff happening. And so I was just coming up with rapid ideas and then drawing them out so that I capture those ideas. Whereas if I truly tried to do one rig at a time and just posed one individual character, I would end up with lots of, probably similar looking characters doing maybe individually funny things, but it wouldn't have allowed to have these little vignettes emerging all over the place, where you have like this scene over here with something being thrown at someone. There's the sequence over here where, one person is on fire. If you look to the left, you see one person's carrying a bucket. And then farther back, you'll see another person holding a fire arrow, that sort of thing. So these sort of things happened because I was able to really quickly draw and just flush out some ideas. And I pretty closely followed this. I think compared to the final render, a few things were tweaked here and there. Maybe where I drew the characters, they were, moved around a little bit, let's say. But largely I followed this. And so then, honestly, the slowest part of this whole project was just going through and implementing that idea. It sounds like at this point it should be easy and trivial, but when you have 50 of anything in 3D, it will take some time. And so basically what I would do is if I re-enable both my props as well as my character over here, and let's see if there's anything else, that should be good for now. So basically I would take a character, I would go into pose mode, I would right click the root bone, and then I would left click somewhere on the screen. Noting that I personally have this setup where right click is select. So that allows me to not have to switch back and forth between this mode. I know for most of my tutorials, I try and use the default of Blender. I actually still use right click select, secrets revealed anyways. So I can very easily left click to place a cursor at any point, and then using Shift S, I can then very quickly snap my rig to somewhere else on the scene. And so let's say that I had imported all of my rigs and they're all sitting, somewhere over here. And I want to then place this character under, over by this horse scene over here. I would just left click, select Shift S, and then selection to cursor, and then I let go or click if I need to, and it just brings my character over there. And then from that point, I would just make a point to then pose my character. The next very useful tip I'd have is using frame selected actually saved me a ton of time working on this. And so even as I've moved this character around here, I really need to be revolving and moving around this character in 3D space to understand if I'm really posing it correctly. And so for that, I go to View, Frame Selected. That brings me out of the camera view and actually brings me to center on this bone, which then if I zoom out a little bit more, I'll see that actually it's floating a little bit because the bone's on the ground, but the character is a little bit above that root bone. And so I'd need to press G and then Z and then bring this down a little bit so that the feet are clipping. I think this character actually had leaping in the air, so that wasn't relevant for this specific one, but all the other ones, that was the idea. And here actually I'm missing, I didn't enable all my rigs. If I put in the horse back in here, I made a point to make sure that the horse was like touching the ground and all that good stuff. So frame selected is a really great way to jump around the scene. Something else that's very helpful is when I'm trying to further edit a character or do parenting or something, there's a lot of cases where there were like little props that went with each of the character. And the breadcrumb here is a good example of that with lots of bread. And so something I would do is, for say, I'd select the character, and then I'd go over into the outliner, press the dot, or I guess it's the numpad period. I'm emulating a numpad on my laptop here. But if I press the period, it actually jumps me into the collection where I have my character and allows me to organize the bread by parenting it to the right mesh or something kind of like this. I think actually where I most often use this was I was running into some issues where there was double planing or Z fighting with a lot of the rigs, which was more due to the fact that I had a camera that had a really long focal length that was far away. And so with Eevee, it was actually double planing, whereas if you're close up, it wouldn't be creating that Z fighting. And so I actually had to add library override modifiers to a lot of the rigs in order to address that. So I don't know if I had to do it for this one here, this skin, but there are a number of others where I had to just add an extra displacement offset to account for that. So anyways, that's kind of the way that went. Something that also saved me a bunch of time while working on this was a feature I'll say I selfishly developed while making this community render. And definitely why it's a good thing that as a developer, I use the add-on that I create so that I know what's most efficient. And so I think this was the example I shared on Twitter actually, where I had a character. Let's say I have a character and I just want to give them an item. Normally what you would have to do is I would say, okay, let's put my cursor somewhere nearby. And then under the item spawner, I'm going to then search for my item. Let's say I'll give it a gold pickaxe this time. Pickaxe. And then I'd press, place gold pickaxe. Oop, looks like I need to reload my file here. Reload items. I think I actually need to reference it into the bare bones pack, because even the item spawning, nicely enough, it will pick up on items coming from resource packs as well. So I'm going to use the bare bones pick right there, going to place my pickaxe, and then great, that's all nice and dandy, but I want to parent it to the bone of my character, so then I have to select the character. Maybe I accidentally selected, I have to make sure I select the pickaxe first, and then very carefully select the armature, then Control Tab into edit mode, then select my bone, and then Control P to parent. And so now when I move it around, it will move the pickaxe with the arm there. But the feature that I developed to save me a ton of time on this render, and this is actually now released with MC Prep version 3.2.5.1 is the number, I believe. So if I'm just in pose mode of my rig and I have a bone selected, now when I spawn the pickaxe, it's firstly automatically placed at the location of that bone, and it's parented to it. And so I'm in object mode at the end, so I can maybe move it around and adjust it a little bit based on where it automatically placed it. But if I go and move my character's arm around, you can see it's automatically parented. I guess I didn't pick a very good orientation there. That's a little bit better. Now you're dual wielding your pickaxe there, which is great. And so that's just a very useful feature. I can imagine this being used a ton if you knew the features there. It's a little bit hidden, but a good power feature to note. Awesome. And so something else I did to, really make sure this thing stayed organized is, again, going back to my top level layout of the scene. I have my world is one collection where I've dropped in the actual library linked image, or not image, the world itself. Similarly, all the character rigs that are from the Discord are a subset of this character collection with one override for each of them. And I tried to keep that pretty much on its own, so it stayed that way. And so that way, whenever I added props, I actually put that into another collection. Arguably, I could have, for example, put the pickaxe in the same collection as the rig here. I think it does actually show up that way anyways in the hierarchy as a sort of soft connection. But what I ended up deciding to do is creating a separate collection called props, and then making sure that all my props, everything in the scene that wasn't a rig, basically ended up in here. And so I have a bunch of cubes. I don't actually know what these are. Oh, this is actually a cube of dirt, it looks like. And by the way, that's the / key to enter local view on a selected object, also very convenient. And / to exit out. It looks like we have a piece of a chair over here, which actually I don't remember what scene that is. Oh, that's something I ended up not using, but I guess is still included in the scene. Oops. Well, Anyways, you get to see all the behind the scenes of this file if you so desire. And so anyway, so I have this collection for props, which is just everything included there. You'll see there's a few cases where I nested them a little bit further. So for example, with this scene or little vignette over here, the weights of the that the person is carrying is in its own collection, so it's just easier to move it around. It actually has a curve, which is the way I kind of do the bending of the rig here, so that it's not just a straight line. And then the actual cubes at the end were added as parented and using a curve modifier. And even these objects here, I think I used the feature, the MC Prep spawning materials or material library. So for instance, I think I just typed in iron and then chose iron block. And then after the fact, I just edited the UVs of this block a little bit just to make it match. So all these things that make it kind of faster to work with, but it's still just a lot when it comes down to all these rigs, setting all these things. You know, for instance, I think I added the chest here using the mesh swap spawner option here. So under, if I do chest, you see there's a double chest option. And I think after I added the double chest, I then did a swap texture pack on it to get the bare bones look, because the default mesh swap files do not have the bare bones pack attached to it. So that kind of helped me some time there. I think I stole this book from the enchantment table, actually, and then just renamed it and parented to the rig here. And so, yeah, I won't go into all these examples, but that's basically the way I went through. And so if I go into some of my older files, like you'll see kind of as I was making progress along. So here I've opened up version 4. You can see this is an earlier version where literally all I had done is just placed the characters in position. So I had that tip that I was sharing before where I go into pose mode, I select the root bone, and then I just click somewhere on the scene and then Shift S to place them. This was just the way I kind of started to plan, and then, okay, I'm gonna just place all the characters somewhere into the scene to get that far. And then as I went through this, what I did, let me open up a slightly later one, is I basically used a copy of that grease pencil layer, the red you see here, as a way to track my progress. So essentially what I did is I made a copy of that layer here. You see the original one is hidden. And then as I progressed, I simply just erased layers of my progress copy of this grease pencil. And so let's say that here looks like I was missing a chicken. So I meant to add a chicken there. I knew I need to get back to that. And so let's say I go ahead and add my chicken here. I'll just go ahead and, oh look, chicken's even already selected. How wonderful. And so now I have a chicken there. I'm gonna go into pose mode, place it here. And let's pretend that, great, that's as much posing as I want to do. I would then select the progress over here, go into draw, and then I just erase that little bit of grease pencil. So that way, whenever I'm zooming out of my image, or if I am hiding everything else other than the draw over layer, I can see, okay, these are the ones that I have left to get back to. Everything else I've finished. So it's a way of me just kind of keeping progress so I don't accidentally leave any of the characters in their default pose by accident. And that's pretty much it. At the very end, I did a couple more steps of just making sure everything is, like sane, that there's not any odd issues. I played around with the lighting and some of the shadow settings. Like I said, I had to go through and fix some of the Z fighting that was inherent with this large depth of field, not depth of field, but the focal length. I think it's set to, that's only 50. It's actually not so bad. I think it's a combination of a focal length of 50 and just the fact that the scene's far enough away that the distance between the layer 1 and layer 2 of the skin was causing issues of EV, so I had to add some displacement modifiers in a few cases. And then at the very end, I added a couple of Easter egg characters. I don't know if you've already seen those two. So maybe if you weren't able to find them on your own, checking out the resource files here will give you a hint. I then also went through and added lights in a few places. So if I go into the final version of the scene, this is going to be equivalent to the one that you'll find on Google Drive. You'll see that I hand-placed lights in just a few places that I thought were appropriate. And so if I go into here, and then I believe I can sort by lights. So I'm just going to disable everything. Oop. Objects, I want to do everything, not lights. Okay, so now if I have lights in here, that didn't help me too much, did it? You'll see that I have a point light over over here. So in this case, I just want to brighten this character up a little bit, not acting as like a major source of lighting, but just a little bit to give them some contrast, because in this case, the Kind Kitten skin is a little bit dark, and so I needed to have this light to kind of help with that. And if you weren't sure, he's actually carrying a steering wheel. That is a reference to the game project he and I are working on. You know, little hint, little crossover there. In other cases, I added additional lights next to some of the lamps because I chose not to actually mesh swap the torches, just to avoid dealing with the particles and other things kind of like that. And yeah, there's a few other areas where I just had to add some additional lights. So even over here with the fire, again, I'm just gonna move my frames back and forth one just to reload the animation there. But on top of the actual lights that come with the fire collection, I added another area lamp just on top just to brighten up a little bit more. And then you'll see even with Eevee, I was a little bit lazy with the compositing here. I just used the bloom option to give some glow to some of the brightest areas of the image, so that kind of comes through naturally. Same goes for anywhere else that there's really kind of this bright light. And yeah, that's pretty much the way it went. So like anywhere that I just felt like it was a little too dark, it wasn't a little bit clear to see what was going on, I just added an area lamp if I want it to be nice and diffused, or a point lamp if it's supposed to be a bit more of a point light. And then another thing I made a point to do is to make sure that the characters were recognizable. And what I mean by that is that they are facing towards the camera. You can see their face. No one's basically turned around looking in the opposite direction. There's a couple cases where maybe their head's turned a fair bit, so it's not too easy to see their face, but at least is forward facing, trying to get the spirit of the, you know, where's Waldo or where's Wally if you're not in the US. I think that's what you say. So that's kind of the idea there. So even like here, I had to kind of like compromise a little bit. Like I wanted this character to be facing towards the portal and everything over here. So they're turned, but still turned a quarter towards the camera so you can see their face to make it recognizable. And that's pretty much it. Like I said, it's just going through, adding new rigs, adding custom models where needed, you know, like the steering wheel over there, or in the case of this climber over here, I ended up just creating a curve object and then adding some bevel to it. And, you know, just going case by case, rig by rig, just setting all those things up. I think over here I had to custom import, like find the actual map image and then use item spawner to then add and then parent it. And then I think I added a little bit of a shape key to, or maybe I just manually edited the faces to give it a little bit of a wrinkle there. But yeah, just going through one by one and just setting this all up. And as I went along, like I said, always making a point to just kind of increment my work. So I can always go back if I ever lost work or couldn't find something I did, I could always go back and look at that. And you know, it's also just nice to have a snapshot of these things. You can also see how long I've been working on this for. So April 2nd all the way through June. Wasn't working on it continuously, but yeah, it's something that I probably procrastinate a little bit more than I need to, given the amount of work that it actually ended up taking. But nonetheless, I'm very excited for the community render to be out. I'm happy that I'm able to share the files with you all. Definitely give it a download, give it a try, sharing the link down below again. And let me know if you like this kind of walkthrough. I didn't do that much planning for it. I'm just kind of speaking pretty raw here. So if you find this helpful, let me know. If you prefer the other style tutorials that take a little bit more planning and so forth, you know, that's fair too. Just let me know what you think. As always, thanks for your time and keep on blending.